next this decade. So we'll look at both the full bear case, the bull case, and the bear case analysis. So on a high level, Airbnb has fallen from grace recently, and it could be a perfect buying opportunity for long-term investors. And we look at both the bull case and the bear case for Airbnb. Overall, Airbnb has really huge potential and a lot of tailwinds behind it, and a huge opportunity, almost $3 trillion in front of it. And it's poised to be a winner. But let's take a look at both the bull case and the bear case scenario. First of all, Airbnb is an online marketplace disrupting the travel and hotel industry. And Airbnb makes money by facilitating accommodation between hosts and travelers or guests. And it receives 6 to 12% of the booking fee for rental accommodations and charges hosts 3% for every successful transaction. About 2 weeks ago, they reported first quarter earnings, and they missed analyst expectations by 81 cents or so per share. The revenue on hand came in above expectations, and bookings were up 50% from the year prior. Airbnb stock has dropped about 35% from its all-time high, and at its peak, the company had an enterprise value of around 130 billion. Now it's only 81 billion, so it could be a good buying opportunity. But let's look at the bull case now. So the bull case is, first of all, there'll be a CEO Brian Chesky believes that it's going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before, and Airbnb is doing all that it can to meet that huge pent-up demand that was caused by the pandemic. There's also long-term trends and tailwinds. The pandemic has brought huge changes to the travel industry, from flexible work to nomadic lifestyles to financial independence, and all these trends are going to play in Airbnb's favor. First of all, people are more flexible regarding travel. People are choosing to travel, work, and live anywhere they like. People no longer travel only on weekends or for recreational purposes. The other trend is people are staying for longer. In 2019, only 14% of Airbnb bookings were for 28 days or longer. Now that number is 24%, so it's pretty high. And people are not just traveling to Airbnbs, they're also living in Airbnbs for long durations of time. Also, people are traveling anywhere. According to Airbnb, previously people were traveling to just 20 or 30 cities primarily. But now people are looking to travel anywhere, in rural areas also. So Airbnb is benefiting from both the rural and urban travel. And these trends are not going away, and travel is not going to be the same ever again. And it's Airbnb's priority in 2021 to prepare for the coming travel rebound. In Q1, their revenue was 887 million or so, and this was an increase of about 5% year over year. But that increased above the Q1 2019 levels as well. So it's definitely bounced back to the levels it was at. But the neat thing is that this recovery in their business happened without their two strongest sectors, the two strongest segments, urban travel and cross-border travel. And they believe that when both of those return back to normal, there's going to be significant tailwinds in the coming quarters. And the neat thing about Airbnb is they adjusted really, really well to this pandemic, and they shifted their strategy and their focus from this urban travel and cross-border travel into more local travel and long duration stays. So close proximity, long duration stays. And despite the pandemic, its revenue is almost the same as it was pre-pandemic. And that's without their strongest historical segments. It has huge competitive advantages and network effects going for it. The total addressable market is huge. It's $3.4 trillion. And that includes revenue from short-term stays, long-term stays, and experiences. The tourism industry as a whole is one of the largest industries in the world. And with a trailing 12-month revenue of 3.4 billion, this means that Airbnb is capturing less than 1% of its total addressable market, or TAM. Also, Airbnb has a really strong brand. It's popular with millennials and young people and older generations as well. And people use phrases like, let's Airbnb it, or let's get an Airbnb. Um, Also, Airbnb is stronger internationally compared to competitors like VRBO. Um, and it's more agile. They move faster compared to their competitors. In fact, they just announced 100 upgrades to their platform, including more flexible destination matching, faster checkouts, improved support, and a simplified sign-up process for hosts. Um, and they have an amazing focus on user experience and customer experience for both hosts and guests. In fact, this is in their DNA right from when they started. Um, And the neat thing is that Airbnb earns revenue from both sides of the equation, from both sides of its customer base, from hosts and from guests. They have really powerful network effects. It's a flywheel because their business model gets strong. Their business gets stronger as more people join the service. So the more people that join Airbnb, the greater the number of available hosts, and then eventually hosts can also potentially become a guest, and vice versa. A guest can also become a host. This is not the case with the hotel industry, where it's not a peer-to-peer model. Um, Also, a major benefit with Airbnb compared to traditional hoteliers is that Airbnb has enormous potential supply of accommodations. Um, if you own a hotel or a hotel chain, then you have to build new inventory. But that's not the case with Airbnb. They just have to convince other people to become hosts, and that's how their supply side increases. They've had um, strong growth in their average daily rate in the first quarter of 2021, which shows a really strong pent-up demand for travel. And travel surveys that they've conducted show the same thing. So, in short, the bull case, Airbnb's booking business is bouncing back really strong. It has a lot of runway, and it's got a lot of tailwinds behind it as well, and a huge opportunity in front of it. Now, there are risks. So let's look at the bear case. The first one is it might be overvalued. Now, the stock price is still not cheap based on the conventional discounted cash flow model. It's still 24 times revenue with negative EBITDA. And the valuation of Airbnb is certainly on the expensive side, and it's pricing in a lot of growth. And industry size, they're not always factored into intrinsic valuation calculations. The second point about risks with the bear case is Airbnb has a lockup expiration period of about 6 months since their IPO, which happened in December 2020. So it's coming up in the next few weeks, might even be next week, actually. So there could be a little bit of downside for investors from investors unloading their shares. However, I believe that this would only be a short-term move, and you can never really time the market. So I personally have already bought shares of Airbnb, and I'm willing to weather that minor blip or storm if that happens. Airbnb is also still losing money and hasn't hit profitability. However, given how much they've invested in the platform and the macroeconomic trends that we've just talked about, I expect this to change in a big way as travel rebounds this year and next year. And Airbnb is well positioned to take advantage of that. There's also the other negative with Airbnb is there's less diversification of its revenue streams compared to competitors like Bookings Holdings, which, does air travel, hotel travel, restaurant bookings with OpenTable, and so on and so forth. Airbnb only focuses on hospitality, like short-term stays, long-term stays, and experiences. The other thing with Airbnb, as far as the bear case is concerned, is they're a very high debt-to-asset ratio. So it's about 78%, which is pretty high compared to, like, for example, a Google or something like that, a company like that, which has much lower debt to asset ratio of below 40% for sure. Also, another risk is that Airbnb's biggest competitor, VRBO, offers a very similar service to Airbnb. It has a strong presence in North America, and it's owned by Expedia. So if they really execute well, that could be a threat. The other possible red flag is there's very low institutional ownership of Airbnb. So only 25% of shares are owned by institutions. And it's possible that's because they think it's overvalued at the current level. And they're waiting for the price to reach a more reasonable level. The short interest on the stock has also risen since the IPO. And other risks also exist, like regulatory risk. That's a could be a big risk factor for Airbnb. And if the company gets banned from certain markets or operating in certain tourist cities or communities, that could be bad for business. And Airbnb has already been criticized for long-term accommodation. Other risks are there's also slow growth in the number of hosts. And you can argue that that's because of the pandemic, because people are not renting out their homes and they are staying in their own homes, they're staying indoors. But for the most part, there are about 4 million hosts and 5.6 million listings on Airbnb. And that has remained flat for a while. And as I mentioned, it could be just because of the pandemic, and it could very well bounce up from there. But you know, it might be a risk. Might be that if there's a huge travel boom and there's a huge pent up demand for hosts, for guests to travel, and the host side of the equation cannot match up with that, then that could be lost business for Airbnb. So overall, so that's a bear case. Overall, keeping all these risks in mind, Airbnb continues to out execute, and it's showing up in their numbers. I have no doubt in my mind that Airbnb represents the future of travel. And at $140 a share or $150 a share at this price point, or an $80 billion valuation, I still think it's cheap and cheap enough, let's say, to initiate a sizable position. Because I think this could very well in the next decade become a 5 to 10x company or a $500 billion company to a $1 trillion company. Overall, Airbnb has enormous tailwinds behind it, a huge opportunity of $3 trillion in front of it, and it's poised to be a winner. So I am long on the stock, and it might make sense for you to take a look at it as well. Again, this is not financial advice, and this is my analysis, so I recommend doing your own analysis of Airbnb and before you make your decision. But I think that it definitely has upside from here. We could see some bumpiness over the coming months, and it could go down a little bit, but I would not be surprised if the valuation and the market size only goes up from here. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching.